Our next category of plants is vascular plants. Vascular plants include ferns and what's referred to as their allies, gymnosperms and angiosperms. And these are our last three categories of the plant kingdom. So we'll talk about vascular plants in general, and then I'll talk about the fern group, ferns and allies, and then we'll do gymnosperms in a separate presentation and angiosperms in probably a fourth one after that. So here's the definition for vascular tissues. The two main vascular tissues that you find in the stems and roots of plants and leaves. The xylem conducts water and minerals up from soil. Phloem transports organic nutrients from one part of plant to another. When we talk about organic nutrients, we're talking about sugar, pretty much. These are the products of photosynthesis. So sometimes not every part of the plant can photosynthesize. Obviously, cells in the roots are not photosynthesizing, so they're getting their energy from sugar, glucose that's made elsewhere in the plant. Likewise, if you've ever laid a board or anything down in the yard and then you move it later, sometimes the grass under it's dead depending on how short the grass is and how wide the board. But oftentimes you'll see that the tip ends of the grass is growing out from under the board and is very green, and then the part under the board is yellow. So it wasn't photosynthesizing, but the part that's exposed, if it's large enough and photosynthesizing enough, can keep the whole plant alive. So sugars can be transported from what's called the source to the sink, from the source where it's made to the place where it's not made and needed. Excess will also be transported to some storage structure. Often that's a root. Sometimes it's a modified stem. Uh, different plants have different places they store excess glucose. Um, Sinclair Gas Company, oil company, has done a great job over decades of promoting that idea with their big green dinosaur mascot. But um, and animals are carbon sources, may have contributed to this too. But uh, really, this is what uh, is the greatest contributor. The main contributor to our fossil fuels today are these plants that grew in these swamps in the Carboniferous time period. When they died, they fell into the swamp and decayed in such a way that they've formed coal, formed oil first and then coal, if I understand, if I remember my geography correctly. Okay. Uh, that oil, as it ages under certain types of pressure, will turn into coal. Uh, and if it doesn't experience those types of pressures, it stays an oil deposit. So, oh, there's the, I didn't remember I had words on this slide. Okay, there it is. Seedless vascular plants form swamps during the Carboniferous period, which compress to form coal that's mined and burned today. So, first phylum, Silitophyta, or Silophytes to be plural, but Silitophyta and plural common. Silitophyta is the phylum name. So, memorizing your phylum name, Silitophyta. The examples of this are your whisk ferns, and they're called that because they kind of have a whisk broom type appearance. They have these erect stems that fork repeatedly to look brushy. Yeah. Their sporangia is located on some of these branches, and they have vascular tissue in the stem, but no true roots or leaves. So here's one of those that's kind of just barely vascular. Okay, but because it's got in one tissue, go ahead and classify it as a vascular. Modern species of these are found in Arizona, Texas, Louisiana, Florida, Puerto Rico, and Hawaii, to name U.S. states and territories, but other places in the world too. When I was going through this slide years back, making it up originally, I tried to pick out of all the places that were mentioned, places that you might have visited, okay, at some point, so that kind of relate to it easier than talk about exotic places somewhere else. Our next phylum is Lycopodophyta, common name of these club mosses. And as we have talked about before, if something is named club something here in these groups, it's because it's got that type of shape um, somewhere, usually in a reproductive structure. And so here it's what's called strobili, and that is your terminal cluster of leaves. So at the end of each branch, stem, okay, there's a going to be this club-shaped cluster of leaves. Terminal means at the end. So, and we have a branching rhizome that sends up aerial stems less than 30 centimeters tall. That's a foot. And then sporangia form a club-shaped structure also on the strobili. Okay. So your common example of this is ground pines, found in common temperate woodlands. But most of your club mosses are in the tropics or subtropics. But if you've ever seen one of these, it would be a ground pine. I cannot say for sure that I have ever seen a ground pine. I have gone looking for them. I'm told by more experienced botany people than me that they're around and they're easy to find. And I have, it's kind of like some of the lichens I've looked at. I've always looked for the Crusteus I can find easy, but the Fruticose and the Foliose, I'm not sure which is which on those. And if I've found them, I couldn't tell the difference. And if I've found a ground pine, I wasn't sure that I was looking at the right thing. Okay. Um, so this is one that I would like to find at some point out. It's supposed to be around here. We've got temperate woodlands in this area. Should be around somewhere. It's supposed to look kind of like little tiny pine trees, sort of. Um, but yeah. This also includes the resurrection plant called Selaginella, and I believe I have already talked about that. So here's where that one fits, though. In a previous presentation, I think I mentioned Selaginella. Third phylum is Sphenophyta is the new name. I learned this one as Equisitophyta. I have kept this in the slide because the common name for this group, and there's only about 15 species, is horsetails. Let's see if I got a picture. Yeah. A really wiry, bushy horsetail. But I grew up in a ranch on a ranch with Appaloosa horses, and they were the old style Appaloosas that had not been bred into Arabians or thoroughbreds a whole lot. And they had that wiry little bat tail. And actually, I had a gelding that would have been very happy to have had a tail that with that much hair. Okay. So yeah, some of the Western ponies back in pioneer times probably really didn't have much of a tail or very pretty tail if they were the Indian pony Appaloosa horse types. Um, so this gets its name from that appearance. Uh, they've changed the name past decade or so to Sphenophyta because this fits more with the naming practice in the rest of the group about naming it after some structure instead of appearance. I will accept either name on the test at this point simply because I'm just doing that. When I first came, I felt that some students in high school, they talked about this in high school, may have learned this name, and I didn't want to make them have to relearn it. So if that's you, if you learned this already and you've learned it under this name, or if you understand that equus is horse, okay, equus is the genus for horses, then equines, horses are called equines, that's their name. Uh, Use this. If that doesn't mean anything to you, and if you've never learned this before, then let's go ahead and learn the proper name. Okay, Sphenophyta. And I think pretty much in recent years, almost everybody's been using the Sphenophyta name. So I'm probably getting to where I can take this off of here, but I haven't yet. These get to be about 1.3 meters tall. So yard and a half roughly, with their aerial stem. And it's the side branches that you saw that make the kind of the green horsetail look. Again, we have strobili being formed. Now what these have is silica, something a little different from them. They have silica in the cell walls, I believe along with cellulose, but this is something that differentiates them from other plant cells. This makes them abrasive. Okay, so these were good, what's called scouring rushes to clean pots. So I always talk about pioneers traveling west. You find these plants in western Oklahoma, western Kansas, kind of in that flat western prairie land right before you get to the Rocky Mountains. I think you also find them further west into the mountains, but I know that that's kind of from what I've read, the furthest east you run into these things. But if you think about pioneers leaving from St. Joseph, Kansas City, some of those jumping off points, as they were called, for the wagon trains going west. Uh, by the time you got across the prairies nearly to the mountains, any scouring pads you had brought with you to clean your cast iron skillets were probably worn out. If you've ever cleaned a cast iron skillet in cold water, it takes a lot of scrubbing. Okay. Um, and I know people who say don't ever put those in water, but yeah, old time people did. My grandparents did, and grandmothers all wash their cast irons in hot soapy water to cut the grease and get that out of there, and then you rub it down with oil after lard after you get it done washing it. So, but you do have to clean them. And so anyway, like I said, if you try to scour those or scrub those things, it takes a lot of elbow grease, and we'll go through a scrubbing pad. If you don't have the hot water to help you dissolve that grease. And you say, well, why didn't they have hot water? And they had a campfire. Why don't they boil hot water? Well, if you have to go, you know how long it takes to boil water. Okay, sometimes it takes longer of a campfire because it's not as hot as your stove. And you've got to go gather all the wood for that. You just come across a prairie. Where's the wood? Okay, around some creeks and rivers, maybe. Yeah, a lot of the pioneers are stories about them using buffalo chips, which is basically buffalo manure, dried buffalo manure, burning that. Well, you've got to go find all that. while you're trying to travel west, you got to also pick up sticks and cow manure or bison manure. So, uh, it uses a lot of fuel. So you just don't boil water for convenience. Okay. You boil water that you have to drink, you boil water that you are cooking with, and you clean with what's left over or with cold. So, yeah, these were very useful and to the pioneers. So they kind of have their place in history and claim to fame, in a sense, from this use. I'm sure they were useful probably to Native Americans living in the area before, but I don't have tales or stories of those to relate, so I can just talk about what I've read about the pioneers. Pteridophyta. This is our final fourth phylum here. These are the ferns, and like earlier in the previous one, we had true mosses. We have lots of things that are called mosses that aren't mosses. Um, Bryophyta classifications are the only actual real mosses. Ferns are somewhat the same way. You've got some things that look ferny and are called ferns that in you go to the nursery greenhouse to buy some plants and there may be something called a fern, but it may not really be a fern. These are the true ferns, the Pteridophytus. How to remember that name? When I was in high school and had to learn these, I was like, uh, fern trees. I always thought fern trees were, because of pictures and books I read about dinosaurs, I always thought those were very prominent during the dinosaurs time period. And pterodactyl. So I could see in my mind a pterodactyl flying over ferns, over fern trees. Okay, big fern trees. And that worked. It's not completely accurate, okay, but it worked. All right, these are abundant in warm tropics, but you can find them. We've got temperate zone ferns, woodland ferns here as well, and they go clear up into northern United States and Canada, I believe. So we can get some moss-like, little moss-like ferns that actually belong to this category. And then, of course, trees. In the tropics, you've got trees that are ferns. So highly diverse group. The structural characteristic of this group is that the young leaf forms curled up in a little roll, and the leaf is called a frond. And when it's curled up in that little roll, it's called a fiddlehead. And if you've ever seen the head, the end of a fiddle, or any of those stringed instruments that belong to that family of violin, viola, cello, big bass, those all have that scroll work at the end where the of the fingerboard. And so that's kind of what this looks like. It's all rolled up like that. It looks like that scroll, this roll kind of cut to look like it's rolled at the end. What happens with these is that unrolls, it uncurls as it matures. And that's a characteristic that of leaf formation that this group has that you don't see in other phyla. Sporophyte generation is dominant. Sporangia develop in sori on underside of fronds sori. So these little sori are black spots. So if you've ever gotten a bouquet with the little ferny greenery in it, it's called a leather leaf fern. Sometimes they'll have little black dots on the back side of the leaf if you look at it. I used to work in a flower shop in my high school. I think I mentioned that previously. My high school job was working in a flower shop. And one of my jobs was to come in and sort those out because back when I was a kid, you didn't put that in a bouquet that anybody would see. We hid those in really, really large arrangements to fill out the inside that people wouldn't see the backs of those because it was hidden from view. We actually put them on what's called casket sprays, which doesn't seem to be much of a thing anymore. Okay, or they're a lot smaller than they used to be, so we don't use as much greenery. But we hid them down in there to make it look dense and green inside the arrangement, and then we put the prettier ones on the outside. So and there's nothing wrong with the front side of these either. It's just it was considered bad form to put those fronds anywhere where a person might see them. So uh, that's the reproductive structure. There's nothing wrong with it. It wasn't a disease on the plant, but people kind of thought that, people who didn't know. But that's where they're going to produce their spores. So there's some ferns. So uses. There's a pretty useful group here. Again, florists, bouquets. Um, in landscaping, they're sometimes put as a background plant up against like walls and structures to have a nice green background to really bring out, set off the flowering plants that are planted in front. In the tropics, the tree-like ferns that grow there are naturally termite resistant. So those make excellent building materials. So things will last longer and not be so quickly destroyed by termites because in the tropics, the termites are larger and even more devastating than what we have here. Um, also, they can be used as a medicine to stop bleeding and source of an expectorant, which as gunked up as my throat seems to be right now, I think I'm in need of an expectorant. What is that? An expectorant is something that makes you want to cough up stuff that's in your upper bronchia in your chest, your throat. Okay, it actually works supposedly two ways. It's going to thin out the mucus that's there, and that kind of I think that whole process also creates in you the urge to cough it up. Okay, and it's like, ooh, that's nasty and gross. Right now, here's a thing: public service announcement you need to be aware of. If you've just got a tickly throat from, say, allergies or something, you really don't have anything that feels like it's in there needing to come out, cough up. It's just a tickly throat, scratchy, and you can't get it to stop. You probably don't need to take a cough syrup that has an expectorant in it because that can actually make it worse. Okay. It can actually make that urge to cough, tickliness worse. Okay. Chances are, if that's what you're suffering from, you really just need to go get you a spoonful of honey or something that will coat the throat like that, soothe it, get that scratchiness out of there, and then you're good. I kind of learned that the hard way. I have a lot of allergy issues, and I've had that scratchy throat that I just can't get to stop itching or tickling or scratching, um, making me want to cough, but I couldn't stop coughing. And I would take cough syrup, and it wouldn't do any good. And then I learned what an expectorant was. And I knew I had seen that word on my cough medicines. And I went and I looked and I was like, oh, no wonder I'm having problems. So that's where I switched over to a spoonful of honey for that issue. Now, if you've got drainage, you've got stuff down into your chest, then you want that expectorant because that's what it's designed to do. And our ferns are a major natural source for those. And we'll move then on into the next one. So I'll stop this recording here and come back later.